Abortion continues to be an issue that causes clashes in our culture. Many politicians and media players say the issue is settled in Canada, and yet a majority of Canadians believe there should be some restrictions on abortion. The new movie, Unplanned, is stirring up a little bit of controversy on the topic. Joining me now is Chuck Konzelman and Cary Solomon. They're the producers, writers, directors, you name it, for this film. Gentlemen, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Now, the film has set off some sparks here in Canada. A number of theatre chains did not want to play it because of the abortion controversy. In fact, some theatre owners I've chatted with even had death threats against themselves and their staff. But after much lobbying, Unplanned finally opens in Canada. Can you share with us a bit of an overview of the film?
Sure. The film is the true life story of Abby Johnson, who is a Planned Parenthood clinic, surgical clinic director. And over the course of 8 years, she was complicit, by her own estimate, in 22,000 abortions. She worked her way up through the ranks from a volunteer escort, escorting women into the clinic, to ultimately the head of the clinic itself. And one day, when she actually had to assist with an abortion, which was unusual for her, she held the ultrasound wand on an ultrasound guided abortion and saw an abortion play out in real time in front of her. And it absolutely changed how she viewed abortion. It was her lightning strike moment, if you want to call it that. And she immediately quit that business and became a very strong pro-life advocate.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Cary, I wanted to ask you, movie theaters often play movies that are controversial. They stir the pot a little bit. So why is this controversy any different than the rest?
I think it's fairly obvious that we're in a worldwide cultural war on just total political differences. And I think that abortion is the most polarizing of all the issues. And both sides are firmly entrenched in what they believe. But what we feel with this movie is that we didn't make this movie as a political statement. We made this movie for the hundreds of millions of women and men that are suffering from angst from having an abortion. This is about hope and love and forgiveness and, of course, redemption. And so what we ask people to do is just basically make your decision after you've seen the movie, because I think there's a lot of truth that will be imparted from seeing what the movie is all about.
What's strange from our standpoint is this film played in over 1,500 theaters here in the United States. We had no protests. We had no threats of violence. We had no closures of theaters. So this is a uniquely Canadian response to the film thus far. So it's very interesting. And the pro-choice movement in Canada seems to be very, very highly defensive with respect to this film. And so it kind of begs the question, what are they so afraid of?
So, I mean, the movie's made over 18 million in the US. How well do you think it'll do in Canada?
I believe that there is stiff opposition in Canada. There are movie theaters that are saying that they're going to show it, but those movie theaters are doing everything in their power for no one to be able to either find times, or they're basically, we have to do the movie before 9:30 in the morning, things like that. So it's ridiculous, really. They're saying on one hand, look, we're showing the movie just to appease people, but there is no attempt on by the movie theaters to actually help, other than the independent movie theaters.
Which is kind of goes back to the whole pro-choice thing. They try to squelch the movie as hard as they can, try to keep theaters from playing it, and then say no one's interested.
But you know, it's interesting, though. You'd think negative publicity would be good publicity because everybody's talking about it. You guys have gone viral with Unplanned. People say, well, what's the big fuss? I got to check out this movie, right?
That's absolutely correct. We had a minuscule advertising budget for Canada, and I think a large percentage of the Canadian adult population will be aware that our film is debuting this weekend. That's not an awareness that we ever could have created without this pushback.
And I think for the amount of theaters that we're going to have, which is around 50, give or take, they're going to be packed. I mean, the experience we had here in America was social media tried to squelch us, put us out of business, they wouldn't take our advertising and so on. And we get the same thing in Canada. But what happened in America was we had theaters filled over and over and over and over. So I think people are going to be really surprised, because the people in Canada have called us, texted us, emailed us, and said, we want the movie to come up here. This is what we desire this. So
how can people find out specifically what theaters and which cities it's playing in here in Canada?
Well, I think that they have to do a little research. That, they're going to have to go online, call up their local theater, say, that kind of thing, because we have unplannedtickets.com. But in Canada, by the way, most of the theaters don't put showtimes up till like 2 or 3 days before the movie comes out. So the showtime should be out now.
If they start searching their local theaters today, those showtimes should be showing up.
Right.
Well, I know here in Lethbridge, Len Binning, the owner of the movie mill, mentioned that it'll be playing at the mill. It's also playing in Calgary and Edmonton, some of the larger centers here in Alberta. Now, guys, some argue that the film is trying to judge people who have abortions. But does it really?
No, I mean, okay, look, one of the things that is really, I have to be honest, is annoying is when the media does an interview with us or they make statements and then we ask them in the middle of the interview, have you seen the movie? And they kind of hem and haw like, I'm going to at some point. Well, how can you discuss or review a movie that you haven't seen? I mean, realistically, okay, the movie, we have in America thousands, tens of thousands of pro-choicers becoming pro-life. We have women in the hundreds of thousands crying and saying, for the first time in my life, I found healing and I'm free of this weight that I've carried.
Large numbers of women who were formerly abortion workers coming out of the industry through the organization, and then there were none that Abby Johnson actually runs, which helps them transition out of the abortion industry and into other jobs.
And when you ask them, what did you think of the movie? They say, I mean, the common thing is it was all about love. It was all about hope, forgiveness. We don't even condemn. We don't take a position in here that pro-choicers are good or bad, pro-lifers are good or bad. When we first started this, what was put on our heart from the Lord was basically tell the truth. I don't want you to be biased. I don't want you to be propaganda. I don't want you to do any of that. I just want you to tell the truth. The truth will set people free. And I think when they see this, people have got to acknowledge, they got to say, this is a fair and honest view of what's going on.
Now, the movie does show an inside look of what really happens in abortion clinics. That's why it has an R rating. Now, the pro-choice side is using media channels to say the movie is untruthful and misleading. So what parts do they really have a problem with? The fact that it's so graphic, perhaps?
They
No.
don't bother mentioning. They just use a blanket dismissal, which is really crazy. If we were going to be accused of anything with respect to this movie, it's of being almost slavishly accurate to what her life was actually like. Matter of fact, if you're pro-life, there are parts of this movie that will make you distinctly uncomfortable because you're watching Abby being an incredibly motivated pro-choice woman for much of the movie until she makes her reversal. And she makes the believers around her in her life, her husband and her own family, pretty uncomfortable with her beliefs. But you get a chance to see and examine it, and you experience her life before and after, much as she did.
Also, people have got to realize that what is the pro-choice side going to say? Of course they're going to say it's inaccurate. I mean, but it's not. Look, Abby was a clinic director for 8 years.
In terms of accuracy, the doctor playing the abortionist who actually performs the procedure, which is most at issue, was Dr. Anthony Levatino, who performed over 1,200 second trimester abortions. His equipment was the real equipment. I mean, our set, we made sure we had everything accurate. We had the equipment, we had the room set up, we had the instruments. But when Doc came in, he reordered the instruments in the order he would use them during a procedure. The woman who plays the surgical abortion nurse was a formal surgical abortion nurse. What the pro-choice element is afraid of is not that it's inaccurate, but that in fact it's accurate.
Right.
Now, Abby Johnson even won an award as Employee of the Year from Planned Parenthood. What were her thoughts of the movie, and how involved was she in the script writing?
She wasn't involved in the script writing, but we did interview her and her family for about 3 or 4 days in Texas. We interviewed every single person. We interviewed every single person that was involved in the movie, the lawyers, everything. We did all our research for weeks, if not months. But anytime you do a story about somebody, anytime you do an autobiography, there's a real possibility they're going to say, this wasn't my story, or I wore a red dress on that day, or something like that. And so there was fear on our part. So we sent Abby the script. We held our breath because you want to have the person you're making a story about happy. And then we got a phone call from her, and she said, this is my life. This is my story. What you guys done is magnificent. I'm looking at my life, and it's a very weird feeling.
There was one scene in particular in the film where Abby has had a rough day at work and she comes home and she starts spilling out some details of her work to her husband. And when it was one of the first scenes we were able to show Abby and her real life husband, and afterwards he started weeping. And we said, why? He said, that's exactly the state of our marriage at that point in time. It was so incredibly real to him what we had
Right.
managed to capture on film. And that's the essence of the whole story.
So, what was it that really changed her mind about abortion?
Well, the accuracy of everything we did in the movie, we've had medical organizations say this is exactly what happens, abortion doctors who have left the industry and so forth. So it's all credible. But the thing what happened was Abby went in to do the ultrasound. She was called in that day. They were a nurse short. She had never been in the surgical room, even though she runs the clinic. She was running the clinic, but she doesn't do the abortion. They bring doctors in, and she puts the ultrasound wand on the baby, and then suddenly sees a baby and says, "Whoa, that's a baby. It's moving. It's not a clump of cells." And the doctor looks at her kind of and like, "They always move. Why do you think I do it this way?" And she's struck. She suddenly realized this is her Saul of Tarsus moment. She gets struck by lightning, and she's like, she wants to say something.
She made the connection that it was a human being in there, and she'd spent her whole professional life up till then denying that. She'd bought the party line that basically this is nothing more than a tumor, that this process is no more involved than a tooth extraction. And she believed it. She'd internalized it. She'd buried it. She'd reinforced that wall. And suddenly, and what she found so interesting, and this was clearly the hand of God, she said, when you do an ultrasound, normally you start off seeing an arm, you see a leg or whatever. She said, I had seen thousands of ultrasounds. I'd never seen a full, perfect profile from the first instant.
And some states have laws in place that require the mother to view an ultrasound of their unborn child before making a decision to abort. How effective are those laws?
Well, statistically, each state varies from state to state, and most of them don't have those laws enforced, or they don't have that law. But we have found that basically between 85 and 93% of the women that see an ultrasound do not abort. And so that's why an ultrasound is the most powerful thing for a person to do, is to basically see that it's not what the abortion industry is saying. And I mean, sadly, the abortion industry kills children for money. And that's what they get rid of children. And it's a sad thing. And by the way, when you see it, when you find out, when we were called to do this, it was a profound realization to us on a lot of levels. I mean, when you find out the truth, it's overwhelming.
Chuck, Cary, if we really are concerned as a society about the health of women, shouldn't women be fully informed of any potential health risks associated with abortion, both physically, spiritually, emotionally, and mentally?
Of course, but there's a lot of people and a lot of politics devoted to keeping that from happening. We had a professional psychologist tell us, a woman say that 100% of her adult female patients or clients who are on antidepressants are post-abortive, that there was a one-to-one correspondence.
100%. Think about that.
Now, here in the States, there's a tremendous amount of overuse of antidepressants. I assume that spills over into Canada as well. If that's the case, we're dealing with such a societal pool of depression, shame, grief that's buried, and these women are not allowed to talk about this. This movie is about healing for those women, where they're allowed to examine that. They're allowed to grieve. They're allowed to seek forgiveness, and then they're allowed to move on. And God willing, they'll become pro-life advocates for the women in their circle, in their church circles, and their families, with the women that they know.
And also, you got to remember, here in the States, and I'm sure in Canada, this is a multi-billion-dollar operation. We give billions of dollars. I mean, there's hundreds of millions of dollars that the federal government gives just to carry this on. There is money involved here. And so people, when that's the case, unfortunately, it's too much money. The temptation is too great. And so the bottom line is they're not going to tell women not to have abortions because it could hurt them. And by the way, the numbers of people that go into an abortion and come out either medically hurt, that people die from abortions. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy statistics. No one talks about that. They just tell everyone, oh, it's wonderful, you'll be fine, you can move on. And that's, I can't tell you how many women we've talked to, and they suffer from the very moment of the abortion, either medically, morally, spiritually, emotionally. It's a terrible thing that's going on. And it's going on, by the way, all over the world. The number one cause of death in the world now, number one, more than war, AIDS, famine, is abortion. Just put that into your head for a second. People should think about that. We are eliminating the population of the world.
Chuck Konzelman and Cary Solomon, producers of Unplanned, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.